Today we are not in the dumb, boring studio. We are out in the middle of what feels like nowhere, which is awesome. And we're out here with Peter Quakenbush to talk about getting buried in this woods, maybe. First off, tell me, where are we and what are we here for?
We are somewhere in Newaygo, Brooks Township, just a couple miles outside of Newaygo City, just north of the Muskegon River. We're actually on an old floodplain of the river, so the river has cut down quite a bit. It's carved its way into the sands that were laid out by the river long ago from the glacial periods. And behind us, way back that way, there's an old bank of the river, but this is pretty nice and flat and sandy. And what's the purpose? Or
oh, well,
the other part of that
like,
question?
yeah, like why do we, that was, I knew as soon as I said that was too dumb and vague, but like what is the point of this property as far as you are concerned?
Yeah, the point of this property, I feel like it has two.
Okay.
One of them is pretty simple, and that is to basically keep looking like this. So this is a fairly high quality Michigan natural community. So it's pretty cool. In Michigan, there's this map that was reconstructed based on the original surveys. So in the early to mid 1800s, when they were surveying the whole state, as boundary markers, they used actual trees, and they indicated what type of tree that was. And based on those initial surveys, they were able to reconstruct kind of the original vegetation of the entire state. And so this particular area was white oak, white pine. And so here we have white pine surrounding us, and we've got a bunch of little white oaks. So at some point later in the 1800s, maybe early 1900s, pretty much all of Michigan was logged. And a lot of that was then developed afterwards, turned into farms and everything. But this area, basically because of the soil quality, pretty sandy, not a whole lot of organic matter in it. The people who were farming here, a lot of them just decided to leave. And those plots of land went back to the government, and that's what formed the Manistee Huron National Forest.
Oh.
So this is technically an inholding in the Manistee Forest, which is just very patchy. So a lot of them have kind of been going back to what they originally were.
So white pine and white oak were indigenous?
Yeah. So that was the dominant forest type here.
Mm-hmm.
Then it was logged. It was part of a farm, but this was the back portion of the farm, and it was never actually plowed. And so when you plow the soil, you end up destroying a lot of the seed bank and a lot of the original kind of inhabitants of the soil and the plant types. So this part was never plowed. So we have some rare parasitic plants, like there's a bear corn over there, and there's a type of Indian pipe. And those types of things kind of disappear when there's soil disturbances.
Oh.
But we have a healthy ground community, and since that first logging, it's just kind of been slowly returning to what it originally was.
So before we started rolling, you pointed out the Indian pipe.
Yeah.
Is that an okay name to call it?
Maybe.
Feels a little gray
Yeah.
area.
So the other one,
but those are indigenous too?
Yeah, yeah. So I used another term, bear corn, for another plant that's right over there. Came up last year, but it was called squaw root, and so the new name is now bear corn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good call.
Yeah.
And even though this isn't why we're here, what is the cool, interesting thing about the pipe?
It's not green, so it doesn't have chlorophyll. It doesn't have the part of the plant that uses the sun power to put together these molecules of sugar. So it gets its nutrients from other plants. It's tapped into the roots of other species. And then, so it doesn't have to grow leaves or anything. All it has to do is make a flower and make fruit, and then reproduce that way. So yeah, it's a parasitic plant. So anyways, to come back around, one purpose is to protect this area. It's fairly special. It has a natural community, and it's fairly intact. It had some disturbance kind of early on, but slowly it has been returning. And the bigger trees in this area are 120 years old-ish.
Awesome.
So we want to protect that. We also, while doing that, we want it to be a cemetery. So this doesn't really look like a cemetery, but this could be a cemetery. Like a cemetery could look like this. And there's nice sort of marriage between conservation and cemetery. It's this dual purpose. Humans need to do something with their dead. And it also happens that green space is important in the ecological services that they provide to us and to the more than human world around us. And we can actually combine these two things into sort of a win-win concept where we benefit and life in general benefits. And this could be a cemetery.
Describe what you mean by that, because just in getting to know you in order to set up this talk today, you know, green burial sounds to me, and maybe this is accurate, which would be awesome, sounds like I'm going to die, I choose to be buried here. The process is dig a hole, throw me in the back of the car, and then just dump me. That sounds so perfect to me, but I don't know if that's accurate to what.
That could be a type of green burial.
That sounds unfeeling too, but I just mean functionally.
Yeah. So at its most basic, green burial does without a few things. So you're not embalmed, or if you are embalmed, there's a few kind of approved, I guess, less toxic substances other than formaldehyde. You're buried just with biodegradable things. So the casket or your clothing, or maybe you're just in a shroud, but all of that can be biodegradable. It can return to the earth just like your body can. And you're not buried with a vault. So a typical cemetery will have some sort of vault, grave liner. Often that's cement, it could be metal, it could be both. But that goes into the ground, and basically that maintains the structure of the ground, and it helps with mowing. So once things decompose, the ground doesn't dip down, it just kind of stays nice and flat.
Is that just a side benefit, or did they seriously invent vaults so mowing would be easier? Because that's some bullshit.
It's the primary benefit, to maintain that nice even lawn. There is also a...
Suck it, lawns.
There is a concept of like kind of protecting the dead as well. It's like, we don't want to let the elements in. We don't want, I don't know, rot to happen, but you know, that happens anyway in a much grosser way if you're preventing the microorganisms and everything from doing what they do so well. So there is kind of a protection aspect of it, and just sort of, it's conventional, but yeah, the main thing is the ground.
But you did mention that if you, I wasn't real clear on this, but it sounds like it's an option one way or the other, like if you want your spot to be marked.
So here.
Yeah.
Yeah, so in the US, there's a Green Burial Council. They've kind of set themselves up as the certifying agency that can certify different levels of green burial. So the green burial's those three basic things. You're not embalmed, everything's biodegradable, you don't have a vault. That could take place in a conventional cemetery. Like you could just kind of have a green burial section or a green burial plot. And you just have those three things, but it still looks like a normal cemetery. Or there are cemeteries that are completely dedicated to green burial, and those are called, so the first one's a hybrid cemetery. The second one's a natural cemetery. There aren't really restrictions on how it can look. It could look like a normal one. It could look more like a forest. But then kind of the third designation is this conservation burial ground, and that has these dual purposes of land conservation, so it's protecting a native community or restoring a native community, and it's burial. So it has to be green burial, but then it's also essentially a nature preserve. And that's what we're going for here. So there's, elsewhere in Michigan, in the Keweenaw Peninsula, there's a group that has gotten together. Originally they were going to try to establish a place similar to this, but that was a little complicated, so instead they focused on getting some of the local cemeteries to offer green burial sites, green burial plots. And some of the ones that looked natural, so basically just normal cemetery with a spot that you can be buried green in, those ones, not a whole lot of interest. One of their other cemeteries, basically like a back portion of it, was forested, and all of those sold out.
Really?
So people like the idea of green burial, but they also really like the idea of being in a place like this. Because, I don't know, the thought, like, it's kind of a romantic thought, but it's a very literal thought too, of like becoming part of this and supporting this, and actually like loved ones being able to come and visit this, and in a very real sense be part of this system. Like, I'm breathing out, the trees are taking it in. What the trees are breathing out, I'm taking in, and like our molecules are actually exchanging. Like, you come here and you don't just walk through the place, or you don't visit the place, you're actually in the place and you are part of it. And so like that concept I really like, and it's beautiful and it's appealing. And just kind of the idea of like your body being a gift to a place like this that supports life, rather than, this isn't a great way to put it, but essentially waste that like has to be taken care of and contained and put away in this place that has to be maintained forever in a certain way, like a lawnscape. That even though it is a place to hold and remember the dead, it's, you know, in a long period of time, there aren't going to be that many people that remember specific people there. And so cemeteries kind of always have this purpose, but kind of the general feeling is that they take up space and that they become somewhat of a societal burden. Like, now it's full, the main purpose is gone, but we still have to take care of it forever, and that means mowing and maintaining gravestones and everything. Whereas here, even if it was full, it still has this additional purpose that is always legitimate. And so it's not taking up space. I like to think of it as holding space for nature.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. I love like everything about the whole idea. And I've thought about I hate to bring this, this comes up in every fucking conversation, but my first wife died when we were young, and so I already was a melancholy Scandinavian obsessed with death. But
I'm Scandinavian as well.
But all the good ones are. But I, you know, especially with, you know, kids who are no longer young, and then watching that as like my grandparents start to pass away and stuff like that, like, I wouldn't put it at nightmare level, but the last thing that I would want for my kids was to be tied to a geographic spot, because they have to like come out with the clippers and get what the landscapers didn't get, and
yeah,
I wouldn't want that at all. I would want to, like, I've joked with them that what I want to do is have, this is not environmentally sound, but packed into explosives and just have a huge explosion, and then I'm gone. Yeah.
Out with a bang, quite literally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which probably is a little bit of copying Hunter S. Thompson, because I think he got shot out of a cannon. But
that's one way to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I also like the idea that it sounds like if you got buried here, you aren't necessarily even marking that spot. So I really would disappear
Yes, you definitely could disappear. And so some people don't want to. Some people, that is their intention. Like, they don't want to have a plot on this earth that, like, they are permanently taking up. So the different types of cemeteries kind of have different regulations on what those markers can be. And so in the conservation burial ground, it just kind of has to fit into the natural landscape in some way. So it could be a native rock. Like over there we have just a little rock, and that could be engraved. Or we could just designate a tree. Like, you're buried next to this tree. It's a red maple. We make a note of it that, like, this red maple is your living memorial. That's your tree. It could come along with, like, a tag on the ground, or, you know, just like a metal stake token with date and name or something like that. So there are options for that for people who want to be remembered in some certain way, but there's no law saying that, like, you have to have a marker there. So it'll be on a map and it'll be recorded with the county or whatever. But another thing that I kind of like is there is, like...
Oh yeah, because I'm sorry to continue that thought, but you would have to take meticulous records.
Yes.
Otherwise this would just become like a mafia dump zone.
Yeah, no, there are records, but those can be on paper. They don't have to be on the land.
Oh yeah. Okay.
But speaking of kind of the land sort of maintains the record itself. So, like, in this area, we're near the Muskegon River. Along it, I don't exactly know where, but there are some ancient burial grounds from Native Americans that were here thousands of years ago. And they're just, you know, mounds on the ground. And those were kind of intentionally mounded up. But when a burial takes place, like, you dig, you put the body in, you cover it up, and for the first few years, like, there's a mound, and eventually that sort of subsides. Maybe it even dips a little bit, but for a long period of time, there will be some sort of small natural indication that, like, something happened here. And for me, I don't know, I kind of like that idea as well, because it sort of just gives you, knowing that, like, this is...
You like the idea of the initial evidence that then it goes away, or what's the part of it that you like?
I mean, kind of like knowing that this forest is sacred in a sense, like set apart, like people are buried here, and this is a spot where people were able to be buried naturally and fit into the landscape, not completely disappear from it and have no effect on it at all, but, like, actually be a part of it. And kind of getting at the idea that, like, we are nature. We don't have to be separate from nature. There is a way to be incorporated into nature and with nature where things are in harmony. And
I like that too, because you are, whether you like it or not, or recognize it or not, and here's a way to well, you know, especially Americans tend to not think like that.
Yeah.
And here's a way to just make that
nature
real
is out
forever.
there.
Yeah, right.
But, like, we can actually, we are part of nature, and this is a very visible time when at the end of our life, like, the elements in our body can actually decompose and go back and cycle into these cycles of life that we really are a part of. We try to distance ourselves from it, and we're doing all sorts of things to damage these cycles, but, like, ultimately we are a part of it.
I just like in the last, let's say, 8 months to a year, sort of had that, like, in a real way, realization, and at least weekly, I wonder if I've legitimately lost my mind. because the signs are everywhere that you and I barely even just exist, and it's all like that. That sounds so. I'm so embarrassed when I say it out loud, but it's so overwhelming.
Yeah.
And obvious if you're sitting around out in the woods paying attention.
But yeah, that component of it, kind of the nature connectedness component of it, is something that I'm quite excited about, because I really feel like, and there's evidence to suggest that, you know, humans don't really care for things that they don't care about. Like, we don't love things that we don't actually have relationship with. And so if we're interested in sustainability and that component of it, we actually have to have this positive relationship with nature. And so there are these kind of routes, these pathways that have been identified that kind of more often than not help lead towards a positive relationship with nature. And some of that is very basic, like just being outside and using your senses and touching the ground and exploring, you know, the sights and the sounds and the smells and tastes if you want to. But like that connects us in a real way to nature, and that can lead towards a bond that we're creating, and that is generally positive. And then thinking about this from the concept of burial in nature kind of creates this really compelling, I don't know, powerful nature connection. So having emotional experiences in nature is another way to connect. So like, imagine coming here, burying a loved one, laying them into the earth, covering them over, being surrounded by nature, and like having them become a part of this place. Like, that's profoundly emotional. You're having that here. Another way is to actually care for nature in some way, like it's kind of this service component of it. And so like buying a plot or maintaining an area like this and maybe taking out some invasives or maybe planting some natives that have disappeared, like that is a very real way that you are caring for nature. That builds positive nature connection. Any sort of symbolism in nature kind of provides us with an additional layer of meaning. So like maybe Grandpa is buried next to this white pine, and like that's his living memorial, and then anytime you see another white pine, you're like, you remember Grandpa, and like white pine kind of takes on this special meaning towards you that has connected you with nature in an additional way. And then just any sort of beautiful experience, like peaceful, green, we're hearing some wind in the trees. Like this is aesthetically pleasing, and that also builds positive connection. So like these are 5 different routes that connect us to nature, and we have them all in a very strong way at one of the most important parts of life, which is the end of life. And that builds this connection that society really needs more and more of, and more aspects of their life, in order for us to care more about the environment, just kind of at this base layer, and want to help it, want to be sustainable, want to be environmentally friendly, because like it's a friend, you know? So I like that component of it quite a bit.
Have you always been this tuned into that, or was that something that you came to gradually?
I've always been very tuned into nature myself. I haven't been able to formulate it quite like that, or, you know, I didn't know those 5 pathways to nature connectedness before, but it was just kind of a framework that made sense, I guess, according to my own experiences.
You said that this used to be, this was the floodplain and the bank was over there?
Yeah, so there's multiple banks. So like the modern bank is way that way. There's one here, I mean, back at the end of this property. Behind that a long ways, there's another one, because rivers kind of zigzag a whole lot over the course of their lifetime, and they carve new things out.
Which I'm asking because you said it's particularly sandy right here, which maybe would make sense on the floodplain. But when I lived in Heritage Hill, I was literally on the hill that was the old riverbank. And that property was so full of clay that it was, if you were gardening, it was hard to like get it off of your shovel. And it wasn't sandy at all. Yeah,
this is glacial outwash plain. So as the glaciers receded and the waters was kind of just flowing underneath them, lots and lots of sand and gravel and rocks and bigger things were just kind of fanning out. And then the river kind of eventually carved its way through that. But yeah, this is just kind of just glacial outwash.
Back to the cemetery part of it, there's no one buried out here right now, is there?
Not yet, not that we know of.
What's the, who knows, but Tell me about that process, because I know obviously it can't be as easy as like, this is what we're going to do, and boom,
Right.
we're open for business.
Right.
And how was that process been?
Yeah, so in like the actual burial process, before we get to our component of it, in Michigan, it's necessary for a funeral director to be involved at least at some point. We're one of the few states where that's a thing. I think there's about 8 states where that's required. But so at least there has to be a funeral director there to sign off that like they've been laid in the ground appropriately, I guess. But the family can do all the other aspects of it if they want to. But typically, funeral directors just kind of take care of everything. And funeral homes can, and they're equipped to do green burials, whether or not they're certified. Because typical like religious burials, like Jewish burial or Muslim burial, they essentially require a green burial. So it might still have the vault, but they're not embalmed. They're kind of just directly buried. Probably more than 90% of Muslim burials are just in a shroud, so not even in a casket. So like that component is fairly protected by law because there is, you know, some religious protections there. So like the green burial component of it is not new and really is not weird, and there aren't rules against it. So you just have to find a funeral home that is willing to work with somebody that's going to do that. But on the cemetery side of things, there's a couple ways that you can set up a cemetery. If you don't want any sort of regulation, then you can be part of a church. Or if you are more of a non-religious institution, then there is a state cemetery commissioner, and each year they will kind of check in and make sure that you're sort of up to code. But it's not too terribly complicated. Part of the setting up bit is that because there has been a long history of cemeteries kind of being abandoned and then really becoming a burden kind of on society, like maybe the township has to take care of it. But in the 1960s, as a state, they decided to do something about that, and now every new cemetery has to be created with an endowment. So like a $50,000 endowment to start with, and then a portion, like 10% or 15% of each plot sale goes towards building that endowment, so that by the time it's full, basically it's created this nice nest egg, and it can retire and it can take care of itself. And so also conservation burial grounds want to do that. So basically every plot sale goes towards this conservation fund that's then, once the land is full, then it can retire and it can take care of itself. There's some health department approval, which is really simple actually. So like Newaygo County Health Department came and dug a couple holes here and determined that we were more than 6 feet above the water table. And then that was that.
Oh.
And we had a surveyor come out here, and we had the whole property placed on a grid into these large plots that can be used for record keeping purposes. But other than that, it's pretty much up to the township whether or not they want to allow something like this to happen, and whether or not that is part of their zoning ordinance.
And have you run into any challenges or pushback on that front?
So to back up a little bit, in our property search, like I knew I wanted to do this, and I had been looking around, exploring properties that might be suitable for it, and I had kind of this list of things that I wanted to be checked off. So it has to have decent access, even in winter. Like it has to be on a road that's plowed, because most of the time the properties that are big enough and cheap enough, like they're down a 2-track that nobody can really get to, and then you can't use that. It had to be at least 20 acres because according to the Green Burial Council, that's what you need to have for this conservation burial ground, at least that much.
And how many acres is this?
This is 20.
Oh, okay.
20.1. So. And I wanted it ideally to be within an hour's drive of Grand Rapids. This is just under an hour from Grand Rapids. And also kind of in our price range, the large enough and close enough properties, they were typically all swamp. So it needed to be dry land. And ideally, the topography would be pretty flat and accessible, like not just a big ravine. And then on top of that, I wanted it to have some sort of aesthetic appeal. Like any property could work. You could have a cornfield and you could like do your best to regenerate that, and that would be good and valuable. I mean, growing corn is valuable too. But that requires a whole lot more work, and it doesn't have kind of the immediate appeal of like, oh, I want to be buried in nature. Like that doesn't really look like nature.
Right, yeah.
So I wanted it basically not to just be a patch of weeds. So this property was within an hour of Grand Rapids. It's on a good road. It's all flat. It's above the water table, and it has a nice native Michigan community. So those checked all the boxes, and it was cheap enough. So that was the first of its kind really that had come up in a year and a half or so of searching. And we knew we had to jump on it real quickly. And then the realtor called and said, hey, there's going to be a couple offers submitted today. If you're interested, you have to submit one too. It's like, shoot. So we submitted an offer, and we won, and we walked it on Wednesday, and it was like we were already owners of it. So that was rather scary. But forgot where I was going with that question.
Oh, I was asking about... I've lost my train of thought several times because I just start listening to the birds and stuff. But I was asking, how's that process going, and had you faced
township
setbacks?
So we had to buy it quickly without basically getting any sort of permits beforehand. And we looked into the township ordinance. We saw that they didn't prohibit cemeteries. And we saw that they probably fit into this like special use permit. And we're like, okay, there's a lot of interest in this property. If we really have to, we can sell it. But like, we'll buy it and then we'll figure it out. So early on, we contacted the township, and we went and had some talks with them. And nobody was against it, really. It was just kind of like oh, interesting. I haven't really thought of that before. Like, yeah, if it's your land, you should be able to make money on it, like, whatever. And then there was an additional meeting at one point where they kind of laid out, like, here are the things that we want you to have before we will actually continue to, go forward with the proposal. And so one of those was a site plan, which isn't super difficult. But the other one was a conservation easement. Because we're like, no, this isn't a normal cemetery. Because they did get... they checked in with their township attorney, and he raised some concerns like, no, we don't like cemeteries because they get abandoned and there's mausoleums and there's bodies falling out of them, and like, this is a terrible thing. And it was like, no, that's not the type of cemetery that we're going for. There won't be a mausoleum, there won't be bodies falling out of it. It won't even look like a cemetery. Like, this land has been taking care of itself since it was logged in the late 1800s, and it looks fine, and largely it will continue to look like this. So they said, basically, like, okay, for us to feel more comfortable with this, like, you need to have an official relationship with a land conservancy. So we've been working on an official relationship with a land conservancy, and that takes a long time. We've tried a few different ones, and for various reasons, like, one is kind of slow, and another one, the higher ups didn't basically want to deal with it, and then a third one we are moving forward with, and that's real good, but like, that has taken quite a long time. And then so in the meantime, just very recently, I guess a couple of concerned townsfolk got together, and one of the last monthly meetings, they passed a new ordinance, so adding to the ordinance, saying that all cemeteries are unlawful in Brooks Township. And they were sure to include every version of a cemetery, so like green cemetery, green burial forest, conservation. So people don't really know what this is. So like there is some misconception of it. Like I was talking to somebody once, and we were talking about like green burial or natural burial or being buried in a forest. And one of the questions he asked was like, well, wouldn't that be weird if there were just bones laying around? Like, no. We're like actually gonna bury them. Like they're not just gonna be people laid out in the woods for the animals to come and, you know, disturb. Like this is a cemetery. It just has trees, and instead of a lawn, it's a native landscape.
I can see why people would think that though, because there is that one place out west that
there's a few
they do that.
body farms.
Body farms.
Yeah, and there's even one in northern Michigan where you can lay people out, and then they use them for science, and they see how they decompose, and they learn things from that. So this is not that. Like, it's a cemetery. It's just, it's also a nature preserve. That was a very new development, this ordinance specially created for us. And all it took was the vote of a 5-member board to pass. So in theory, it could be changed, I guess, as simply as that, but it means that we're kind of fighting the higher-ups, which really sets things back. So next week we're having a meeting with some of the people actually from this township who have joined our wait list. So as we've been setting this up, we have a wait list on our website, and people who kind of know that this is something that they want, and that basically they would be willing to buy a plot if and when we were able to sell a plot, and they can just add themselves to this wait list. So a good number of people actually from this local area have signed up to that, and we're getting together to see, I don't know, about some sort of action plan. Because, I mean, if the township wants it, you know, the government of the township should kind of be acting in their own interest, but it's hard to say what the future for this specific location will be. Like, it's a wonderful spot. It checks all the boxes. I know and love it well, but ultimately I want a conservation burial ground in Michigan, and maybe it will be here, maybe it will be somewhere else. But yeah, so township level stuff is difficult.
So the next part of the process is just trying to get the board to change their mind, basically?
Basically.
Or at least enough of them to change their mind?
Yeah.
And then what happens if that doesn't happen? What's the path forward then?
Well, it could mean sell this and look somewhere else, or there are various other interest groups. So, like, because we don't have anything to sell, because we don't have a cemetery, like, I haven't been promoting this idea, but quite frequently people will come to me and be like, hey, can you give a talk on this? Or, hey, would you be interested in a podcast? And so, like, this is a message, and this is a topic that people are really interested in. And there are other people in Michigan and in this area who are quite interested in having one of these, because they like actually want to be buried in a place like this. So over the past couple years, as we've been kind of building support and like people on the wait list or various other contacts that we've had, it would be probably beneficial to get the most interested people together and say, hey, we all have this common interest. We want this to be an option in Michigan. What do we need to do? Like, where can we go where they will accept us, where they will be fine with having a forest where people can be buried in nature, and how can we do this? So where there's a will, there's a way, and where there's people and there's a big network, like, there is power there.
I jump at any excuse to go for a hike, no matter how small, and the more bushwhacky, the better. Would you mind showing me around the property?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, awesome.
We have a couple trails, and most of the trails here were originally created by the deer.
I love following animal trails.
They've been improved a little bit, but I have not done a whole lot to this place because we have never really known if this was going to be the place.
Right.
But there's also definitely some bushwhacking opportunities if you'd like.
Cool.
Which I like to call boonie stomping.
I like that better. Boonie stomping. Good, now it's recorded, so I'll remember. Boonie stomping. Yeah, let's go boonie stomping.
All right. So throughout here the biggest trees are white pines, like that one there. I think they're about 120. They kind of stand out. I estimate about 200 like that on the property.
And they're all about
They're various
120 years
ages,
old?
but many of the big ones are kind of similar in size.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
While we're out here walking, we didn't talk about it when we were sitting down, but you mentioned forest baths. That sounds awesome, even though I don't know what that is. So
Yeah,
tell me about that.
It's not literally what you think it is. It wasn't a whole bunch of people taking a bath in the forest in the normal bathing sense. But there were about 18 of us, and we had an official forest therapy guide come out. She's certified by an organization that does this sort of thing. And the idea behind it is that nature is healing. So like coming out here, the science is like your cortisol levels actually decrease and your blood pressure decreases and your brain kind of calms down a little bit and you can be calmer and more creative and just rejuvenating, and the phytomolecules coming from the plants, like they actually help boost our immune system. So just like coming out here, being calm, spending time in nature for a few hours, like it's good for you. But if you're doing that with a group and you kind of come and do slow contemplative walks and you explore the senses, or you go out and maybe you wander around and look for a gift that's just like specially for you. Maybe it's like a leaf or an acorn or a pine cone that has some sort of meaning to you, and then you can come and take it back and share that significance in a group together. It creates this very profound experience of connecting with self, kind of connecting with group, but then also connecting with life around you. So we hosted it with Newaygo County Environmental Coalition here, and also just kind of in the context of like, maybe I could be buried here, and like maybe I could, like I am a part of this, but maybe I could actually be a part of this and help protect a place like this. It was a really fun experience.
Do you think that that's a lot of what was going through people's minds?
Yeah, I think
when
so.
they were out here? Like about burial, like where's my favorite spot? Maybe I should get buried here?
Right, yeah, pick a favorite tree. Yeah, so a number of the people there were on that wait list. Like they had expressed to us in some real terms that they probably want to be buried here. And another thing that stood out to many of the people was like, here there are a bunch of logs, mm-hmm. and they just kind of get really nice and mossy. And being connected with the cycles of life and death, I don't know, it's nice to be connected to reality in that way, because like in our own society, we don't really have a place for death. Like we don't want to talk about it. We kind of shun it. Like we're reluctant to do anything with it. You know, it's icky and nobody really wants to die. So it's like we just sort of avoid it altogether. But out here, death is kind of all around us. Like a tree dies. And it's nice to see that like its purpose isn't completely gone. Like it doesn't just become waste that has to be, you know, dumped somewhere. Like as a standing tree, the woodpeckers come and there's all sorts of beetles and things that are eating off of it, and the woodpeckers make holes and then they live in it, and then like owls and other sorts of squirrels and things move into it, and eventually it falls over and then it lays on the ground, and then it becomes like this host of all sorts of other little green things like mosses and lichens.
Yeah,
and
this is really gorgeous
and
back here.
Fungus, and you know, and like things live under it and in it, and ant colonies and everything. And it also just kind of is this absorbent sponge. So here it's a lot of sand and the water just runs away. But if you have a log like that, that's a sponge, like it kind of provides this organic material that just holds on to water a little bit longer. and it very slowly over time enriches the soil with that organic matter and makes it so that ultimately more life can be supported here. So like here, the living things have a purpose and the dead things have a purpose, and they're all just kind of helping each other live. And the thought that like we could come here and like our bodies could actually be a gift to this ecosystem as well really puts like a different sort of, I don't know, like a peaceful sort of redemptive concept to death that really is healing, I think.
So again, I just want to say thank you for bringing me out here, and such a gorgeous property, and sounds weird, but I'm definitely gonna go home and put myself on the wait list.
Nice.
Very importantly, where do we all find that wait list?
We have a website, miburial.com. My Burial, Michigan Burial.
miburial.com.
Yeah.
And you also have sweet merch on that website.
We do.
Yeah.
We have some
And
some t-shirts with slogans and all sorts of merch.
And that all goes to the efforts of
Yeah.
bringing this to fruition.
Yeah. So
I have a Make Burial Green Again shirt on
I know,
right
that's
here
awesome. I
with
saw
the nice
that.
white pine.
That's awesome. Well, thank you very much. This has been great.
yeah, thanks for having me and helping spread the word.
Yeah, absolutely.